Welcome back to the deep dive. Settle in, because today we're jumping into a really essential but maybe less discussed sector, Japan's pesticide industry.
Yeah, definitely essential.
We're going to unpack the current state, the key dynamics and the players shaping this market. Our goal for this deep dive is really to pull out the most important insights and facts, give you a clear picture of what's happening.
A really actionable picture, hopefully.
Exactly. You might wonder, well, why dive into this specific area? But it touches on so much: how food gets to your table, agricultural tech, global trade flows, even environmental stuff.
It's a pretty complex landscape.
It is, and understanding it helps us understand some bigger world trends, I think.
And what's fascinating here, I find, is just how unique Japan's market is.
Huh.
You've got factors like the specific climate, right? The incredible diversity of crops grown here, and these really established distribution networks. They all create a different competitive environment compared to the global stage.
So those unique pressures shape the strategies.
Exactly. They shape how the companies involved have to operate.
Okay, so let's start with that big picture then.
Yeah.
What does the Japanese domestic pesticide market actually look like?
Fundamentally, it's a mature market. You have domestic companies operating alongside these larger international players.
Right.
But the local guys often have to rely on more specialized approaches, simply because the global giants, they just have scale advantages that are, harder to match here at home.
And when we say pesticides, we're mainly talking chemical ones.
Yeah.
Still the most common.
Yeah, chemical pesticides are still the mainstream, though you do see biological options growing. And the main categories are pretty standard. Herbicides for weeds, insecticides for pests, and fungicides for plant diseases.
Got it.
But here's a really interesting point, I think. Japan actually uses a relatively high amount of pesticides compared to, say, Europe.
Why is that?
It largely comes down to the climate. Japan's hot and humid conditions are unfortunately just very favorable for pests, diseases, and weeds. They flourish, so it requires more preventative action.
Right, the environment itself is a huge driver. So, market size. What are we looking at?
The domestic market is valued around 350 billion Japanese yen. That's based on domestic shipments.
Okay.
And there's a key trend within that number. Well, the actual volume of pesticides shipped has been declining long term.
Which makes sense, right? Fewer farmers, less land, more organic trends.
Precisely. But the value of those shipments has actually been slightly increasing.
Huh. That seems counterintuitive. Volume down, value up. What's that telling us?
Well, it strongly suggests a strategic shift, maybe focusing less on sheer volume and more on higher value products. Or it could reflect price increases, perhaps due to rising costs or, more advanced premium formulations being introduced.
So generating more value from less actual stuff.
Basically, yeah. It's about maximizing that value.
And you mentioned the diversity of crops earlier. That makes the market here demand huge variety, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Unlike global markets that might focus heavily on just a few big crops like corn or soybeans, Japan grows everything. Rice, tons of different vegetables, fruits, many quite niche globally.
So companies need a wide portfolio.
They really do. A one-size-fits-all product often just won't cut it here, which again kind of favors those specialized approaches over just pure scale.
Makes sense. And of course, the whole thing operates under government oversight.
Oh, definitely. The Pesticide Control Act is key. It regulates everything: manufacturing, import, sales, how things are used, strict controls.
Okay, let's dive a bit deeper into those domestic market specifics then. That need for multi-product compatibility really stands out.
It does. And if you look at where the value is, rice cultivation plus vegetable and field crops, together they make up about 70% of the domestic shipment value.
70%, wow.
Yeah. And even though the volume used on rice is down, the value has remained pretty stable, which again reinforces that point about maybe higher prices or more valuable products being used in that segment.
Interesting. But this domestic picture, it's only part of the story, right?
Oh, absolutely. The global pesticide market is actually growing, particularly in places like China and Brazil. It's driven by that increasing global demand for food.
And this is where it gets really interesting, maybe even surprising for some listeners. Japan has actually been a net exporter of pesticides since 2015.
That's right. In 2023, the value they exported was significantly higher than what they imported.
So why that export growth?
It ties directly back to that increasing global food demand. You've got population growth, rising living standards in emerging economies. It all fuels a need for effective crop protection worldwide.
So where are these Japanese pesticides going?
Well, a good chunk goes to Asia, China, India, makes sense. Similar crops like rice,
Uh,
but also places like Australia.
And imports, where are they coming from?
Primarily China, the USA, and Germany are the main sources for imports into Japan.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to R&D. Developing these products sounds incredibly tough.
Oh, it is. Developing a brand new pesticide active ingredient is incredibly challenging and expensive.
How long are we talking?
The process can easily take over 10 years. And the cost, hundreds of millions of US dollars. You might start with, say, tens of thousands of potential chemical compounds.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah. And maybe only one makes it all the way through the rigorous testing for efficacy and safety.
That's a massive gamble. Huge risk. Huge potential reward, I guess.
Exactly. It really highlights why strong R&D is so critical. And Japanese companies have shown real strength here, especially in discovering original compounds and developing solutions for those diverse niche crops, vegetables, fruits where they have deep expertise.
Is there another way besides starting from scratch?
Yes, there's the option of generic pesticides. Once a patent on an active ingredient expires, other companies can develop their own version.
Ah, like with pharmaceuticals?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
The R&D costs are much lower, assuming they can prove their product is equivalent in safety and effectiveness to the original. It's another route to market.
So once a company have a product, how does it actually get to the farmers in Japan? The distribution sounds unique.
It is quite specific. Sales primarily go through agricultural cooperatives.
Yep.
The big network known as Nokia is key here, or through specialized wholesalers.
Why that route?
Well, because many Japanese farmers run relatively small-scale operations. They rely heavily on these established networks for supplies, advice, support.
Okay.
And within that co-op system, Zenno, which is the national federation, plays a huge role. They often handle the main price negotiations with the manufacturers.
So that limits the manufacturer's direct control over pricing.
It does, compared to, say, dealing directly with large corporate farms you might find in other countries.
We also see partnerships happening, right? Japanese firms working with overseas ones?
Yes, that's a key strategy, too.
Yeah.
Japanese firms can gain access to global sales channels through partners. And the big overseas players might leverage the Japanese firm's deep knowledge of the unique domestic market and its distribution network.
Sort of a win-win, bridging the local and global.
Potentially, yes. It's a way to navigate those different landscapes.
Looking ahead now, what are the big emerging trends shaping this industry?
Two really stand out. First is smart agriculture. This includes things like precision application tech, but maybe most notably in Japan, the rapid rise of drones for spraying pesticides.
Yeah, the numbers on drone use are striking. You mentioned the sources show a huge jump in pesticides registered just for drone application.
A massive jump. The number more than doubled just between 2019 and 2023. Went from around 640 up to over 1,200.
Wow, that adoption rate seems incredibly fast.
It really is, especially for vegetables. It points to a major shift in how these products are actually being applied out in the fields.
Okay, so drones are one big trend. What's the other?
The other is biopesticides. These are products derived from natural sources, think bacteria, fungi, plant extracts.
Seen as more environmentally friendly alternatives.
Generally, yes. They're gaining significant traction globally, particularly in places with strong environmental regulations like Europe and the US. And Japanese companies are definitely investing in R&D here, making acquisitions too.
Right. So we have this complex market, domestic maturity, but export growth, intense R&D, unique distribution, new tech like drones and biopesticides emerging. Who are the main companies navigating all this?
Domestically, there are several players, but Sumitomo Chemical is the largest. Globally, as we touched on, it's much more consolidated. You have the giants like Bayer, Syngenta, BASF, Corteva dominating.
And that global scene saw a lot of shakeups, mergers, and acquisitions.
Oh, yes, quite a bit over the last decade or so.
Yeah.
Big names combining, like DuPont and Dow, eventually leading to Corteva, Syngenta getting acquired by ChemChina, Bayer buying Monsanto.
And what drove that consolidation?
Often, these big players want to integrate seed businesses with their crop protection products, offering farmers a kind of bundled solution. Seeds have been a major driver for M&A globally.
Okay, let's zoom in on some key Japanese players then. You wanted to talk specifics about their strategies and products.
Yeah, let's do that. First up, Sumitomo Chemical. They're a huge, diversified chemical company. Petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, IT materials. But their health and agriculture segment, which includes pesticides and fertilizers, is pretty significant, about 20% of their total sales.
And strong on R&D, you mentioned.
Very strong. They consistently rank highly in global pesticide patent filings. Looking at their pesticide business, it's diverse insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and also those biorationals, the nature-derived products.
What's their core strategy look like?
A key part is their strong focus on overseas markets. A huge majority of their pesticide sales, over 80%, are actually outside Japan.
80%. How do they manage that?
By strategically targeting big agricultural regions like Latin America, where you have large-scale farming of crops like soybeans. This involves smart partnerships, like one they have with Monsanto, and also acquisitions. They bought New Farm's South America business a few years back to really boost their access there.
So despite maybe some wider company challenges, this agro segment is seen as a growth area.
Absolutely. It's viewed as a core growth engine. Their current strategy includes focusing on more sustainable practices, like regenerative agriculture, no-till farming, and expanding sales of products that fit those methods, especially in growth markets like Brazil and India.
Okay, interesting. Who's next?
Let's look at Nissan Chemical. They started way back, originally focused on chemical fertilizers. Today, their agricultural chemicals segment, pesticides, animal health, makes up around 30% of their sales.
And they have a particular specialty.
Yes, herbicides.
Yeah.
That's the majority of their pesticide sales. Domestically, they actually hold the sales rights for Roundup, which is, a globally massive herbicide.
Right. What about exports?
Also important for them. About half of their key pesticide products get exported, mainly heading to Europe and Africa.
And they've leveraged their chemical know-how in other areas too.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. They use their insecticide research to develop something called fluorolaner. It's a very successful drug for controlling external parasites like fleas and ticks on pets.
Ah, so crossing over into animal health.
Exactly. And it's been a significant profit driver for them recently. Their core agricultural chemical business itself also tends to have a pretty healthy operating profit margin, maybe 25–30%.
What are their plans going forward?
Their midterm plan, running to about 2027, aims for continued growth. They want to maintain share in Europe and the Americas, but really target expansion in Asia and significantly grow their insecticide sales globally.
And domestically.
Focus is more on stable revenue from existing products, but also expanding the portfolio, especially for rice. One thing to watch, though, is that the patent for that successful pet drug, fluorolaner, is set to expire soon, around March 2025.
Highlighting that constant pressure for new products or extensions.
Always. That R&D cycle is relentless.
Okay, who's the third major player you wanted to cover?
Nihon no Hyaku. They're quite different because they're purely focused on pesticides. In fact, they were founded as Japan's first comprehensive pesticide maker.
So very specialized.
Very, and highly committed to R&D. A large chunk of their products, over 70%, are self-developed. They beefed up their research capability by acquiring Mitsubishi Chemical's pesticide business back in 2002, and more recently became a subsidiary of Adaka in 2018.
And their sales mix, domestic versus overseas?
Similar to Sumitomo Chemical, actually. A high overseas sales ratio, around 70% in FY 2023. Major markets for them include Brazil, the USA, and India.
Is there anything particularly unique about their business model?
One interesting aspect is their revenue from technology royalties. They license out technology, particularly for certain insecticides they've developed.
Ah, so earning money from their IP.
Exactly. These royalties might not be the biggest slice of total sales, but they were very profitable and can give their operating income a real boost. The flip side, of course, is that when a license expires, it can cause a noticeable drop in profit.
Makes sense. And their strategy?
For the next few years, they're focusing on expanding their business scale in those key overseas growth markets. Brazil, India again. In more mature markets like Japan and Europe, the aim is more about enriching their product lineup, adding new things.
Any specific product focus?
They're specifically highlighting the development of what they call environmentally harmonious products, trying to reduce environmental impact, lower chemical residues. That aligns with the broader trend we discussed.
Right, the move towards biopesticides or lower impact chemicals. Are there other domestic players worth mentioning briefly?
Yeah, there are others like Kumiya Chemical Industry, Nippon Soda, Ishihara Sanjo, Kureha. Generally, the pattern seems to be the big ones we discussed. Sumitomo, Nissan, Nihon no Hyaku tend to lead on the fundamental R&D, discovering new active ingredients.
And the others?
Others might focus more on formulation, how the active ingredient is mixed and prepared for practical use, or they might use active ingredients developed or acquired from elsewhere.
And we've seen some consolidation here too, not just globally.
Yes. Over the years, some companies have pulled out of the pesticide business domestically. It's a tough, competitive market.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have.
We looked at the unique nature of Japan's domestic market, mature, diverse crops, specific climate needs, then how global growth in food demand is actually driving Japanese exports, making it a net exporter despite that domestic maturity.
Right, and that incredibly long, expensive, high-risk process of R&D for new chemical pesticides.
Plus the specific distribution channels involving Nokia and wholesalers. And then we drilled down into the distinct strategies of key players like Sumitomo Chemical, Nissan Chemical, and Nihon no Yaku.
Highlighting how they leverage R&D, target global markets, sometimes specialize, and deal with things like patent cycles and royalties.
We've really seen how this industry is shaped by, well, everything from climate and crop types to distribution systems and global population trends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those emerging trends, smart ag with drones, the push towards biopesticides, they really signal where innovation and investment are likely heading next.
So hopefully you now have a much clearer picture of the forces really shaping this essential Japanese industry, from the farmer's field all the way to global trade routes and corporate strategy meetings.
Yeah, and maybe one final thought to leave you with. Considering that huge cost and uncertainty in traditional chemical R&D versus the faster adoption of tech like drones and this growing global interest in potentially quicker to develop biopesticides, how might that balance shift?
You mean the balance of innovation or market power?
Both, really. How might it shift between different types of companies, the R&D giants, the generics, the bio-focused startups, and between different types of solutions in this industry over the coming years?
That is a fascinating question, something to definitely keep an eye on as this really dynamic sector continues to evolve. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Japanese pesticides. We hope it's given you some valuable insights to think about.